Hey y'all, welcome back to Exile Wargaming, where today we're going to be talking about where Harlequins fit in the meta, some different list concepts and ideas, and where I think a lot of our strengths and weaknesses lie. Now, before we dive in, I think it's important to identify the different play styles that are afforded to us in the Ghosts of the Webway detachment. We have our standard MSU style army, we have a more heavy-handed, aggressive approach, and then we have this kind of choose your own adventure setup where it's basically Eldari utilizing some Harlequins as allies. Now, the MSU game plan is essentially based around budgeting resources each turn to throw away, in a sense, do a little bit of chip damage, and contest primary. I view each one of our units as points on the board rather than damage dealers. If they are holding an objective or completing a secondary, or if they're move blocking one of my opponent's units from getting 5 or 10 points in primary or secondaries, they're doing their job. The goal of this is to secure one section of the board, typically our natural expansion, early and hold it until the end. We prioritize our secondaries and move block reasonably, utilize your lone ops with Resurrect to get some early turn high primary, create a score gap, and then play the mission for the remainder of the game. You do not have to table your opponent. In fact, you will most likely not have enough firepower to do so, especially in the more stat check style army lists. Now, one of the strengths of this style of list is that we have a ton of fast OC in our Harlequin troops. They're great for doing some damage, skirmishing, move blocking, contesting, screening. They play the missions very well, and they don't care much about our matchup or our opponent's damage profiles. It doesn't matter if it's a Guardian Spear or a Chainsword, everything feels exactly the same to a Harlequin troop. Something I really like doing, especially if we get the first turn in this style of list, is pushing up one of our lone ops to the midfield objective. We keep our home field safe, we stay out of engagement range of the majority of our opponent's force, we grab our natural expansion. On turn 2, we typically are going to score a 15 on primary unless they brought something up on the early turn. But on our turn 2 as well, we're going to contest our opponent's natural expansion and hand them a 5. So we're going in to our turn 3 with 15 points in primary before we score to our opponent's 5. We can help run away with the lead from this point on. If we needed to just move block something like all of these Custodes back here, we can launch out this unit of Harlequin troops as well and keep them from getting onto this center objective, or we can launch another unit of troops out over here, or maybe bikes to move block this section of the board. It's not about killing things at this point in time. It's about scoring as many points as we can turns 2 and turns 3, and then just contesting as many points away from our opponent afterwards. You do not have to kill a whole bunch in this army, but it does require a good amount of precise play and planning. I like to have something like 18 to 20 units in this army so I can reliably throw away 4 or 5 units each turn. If they're doing some chip damage, it does start to add up over time, but we can run away with the score even though it looks like we're getting decimated on the table. One of the weaknesses, though, about a list like this is that because it requires that precise play and planning, it does lack the ability to deal with some really high toughness or stat check style armies really well, especially if they stack them on one section of the board. We just have a hard time chewing through all of it, but the games begin to become exhausting. Every game is a grind. Typically, the games are close. We're going to maybe walk away with a 10 or a 15-point lead, depending on how well we set ourselves up in the first turns, or if we got the bottom of turn 5. But overall, over the course of a tournament, this just turns out to be a bit much. Now, when utilizing the Ghosts of the Webway detachment, I do not believe that any of our games are going to be auto wins or auto losses. So what I have here in solid matchups or rough matchups are those I believe can swing beyond or below that 50% win rate as long as we're doing things appropriately. I think we're really great into these static, more shooting style armies like Tau. We can utilize our lone ops to really run away with the score early on, and because we have those resurrects, we are continually forcing our opponent's trash units outwards. We can get some free kills with our troops and our Star Weavers and just take over from there. Same thing goes with Eldari and Drukhari. While they have a ton of tricks, there's a lot of units. Our Harlequin troops are highly efficient into them, and we have a ton of transport protection as well. We can get around a lot of what they have to offer as long as we stage appropriately. When you're going into Eldari, you want to make sure you're protecting your troops and the Star Weavers, because warp spiders will crush you if you are not paying attention. Now, we're also pretty good into elite low model count style armies. Anything with 8, 9, 10 units on the whole, without a ton of battle line to put OC on those objectives, we are going to be able to contest pretty regularly, regardless of if we can kill them or not throughout the course of the game. I've been able to run away with the score in a ton of games without killing much of anything. And then last but not least, as far as a lot of our solid matchups, it's anything that does a lot of damage in a single phase. Something like World Eaters comes to mind. They do not have a ton of shooting. They do most of it primarily in melee. Our transports really protect us from all of our important units getting collapsed on. And those fusion pistols are insane against things like Possessed or Slaughterbound or even Berserkers. You name it, they're really, really good into that platform. So I think if we play right, those are some pretty solid matchups for us. As far as our rough matchups, Death Guard is a bummer because of the range on our fusion pistols, because we need to be in range of them to do anything in melee. They have their weapon skill debuff and everything else that comes with it. It just skews the math so much that unless they're putting a ton of units inside of strategic reserve that we can screen out the board from, it makes it very, very difficult. As well, Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights just jamming everything forward onto objectives. Their OC is so high that we now have to rely on our own damage to get the job done, and it's a little bit shaky when fusion pistols and 4 or 5 devastating wounds coming out of a troop are a main source of damage. It makes it very difficult to run away with a game. Astra Militarum comes to player skill. Same thing with Custodes. If you're running up against an opponent that has a lot of reps with their army, these are going to be pretty difficult matchups. Astra Militarum just trades so well into us, and Custodes, you never know what's going to happen with the 4+ saves and their mitigation of mortal wounds and their feel no pain. So these could be rough matchups. They are not unwinnable by any means, but it is an uphill battle from the get-go. So a good example of a more MSU style list is exactly what I brought to my last GT. I ended up going 4-1, lost in my final round to Imperial Knights. We had 19 total units. Brought a couple troop masters, attached to some troops and some falcons. We had a Death Jester with Murder's Jest, a Solitaire, 6 units of 5 troop total, 4 Star Weavers, 2 units of 2 Sky Weavers, 2 units of Fire Dragons, and a Wave Serpent to cart them around. Kind of a single phase bullet if we needed to deal with a hard target. Now, there are some considerations for a list like this. This is not a one-size-fits-all. Everyone needs to run this style. There is a lot of Eldari counterparts that you can fit in to have some really great success with. Rangers are a really good option. Since this tournament, I have swapped out the Death Jester for 2 units of Rangers. I really like having some infiltrators in the midboard, something to move block, maybe hyper-aggressive armies, or just force our opponents out as well. Having 2 of those is pretty nice. We can put 1 on the home field objective and then 1 towards the midboard to just do actions or screen wherever necessary. Shroud Runners are a really nice option as well. I have got these on the table once, and they proved pretty efficient at scoring us a good amount of extra points in the first 2 turns. It's really nice to scout them, especially if you get the first turn and move block your opponent in, as long as they don't have a bunch of fly units to their deployment zone. It gets you an extra turn of scoring primary. Swooping Hawks are really solid. Warp Spiders are great as well. Vipers are pretty cheap, kind of fit the theme. And then Storm Guardians are one of my favorite units that I want to try to find some room for. Unfortunately, I really enjoy just playing as many Harlequins on the board as I can, but these guys are great at holding the home field objective for the first few turns. When there's no more deep strike threats, you can push them out to the mid board with 20 OC, contest, and then maybe gain yourself some additional primary as well. Storm Guardians are great for a 10-point swing. Warlock Skyrunners are fine for actions, and the Corsairs aren't too bad either, utilizing that scout move and their 2 OC just to kind of contest your opponents early on. For 60 points, there's not much better you could put on the board at that price point. But really, when you're building a list like this, you want to make sure that you're keeping it upwards of at least 18 total units. This is kind of the sweet spot that I've found, between maybe 18 and 21 units, so that you have enough trash to throw away each turn while contesting objectives, and you don't have to rely on dice to get the job done. That is something I enjoy about the MSU style list, is that you don't really need to worry about rolling the dice every turn, getting those kills, your opponent missing their saves, and everything else. So it's just nice to be able to skew the game in the way you want instead of hoping for a good roll. I also think it's important with a list like this to have a couple hammers, something to deal with a few hard targets. That's why the Falcons are here. That's why the Fire Dragons are here. But for the most part, we are just trading on objectives with our troops. Now, recently, I've been attempting a more aggressive style, heavy-handed approach to the Ghosts of the Webway detachment. The goal is to set the tone early with infiltrators and heavy hitters. Utilize that Shadow Seer brick and Solitaire to tie up some enemy units while the rest of our army stages relatively safely. We're going to be utilizing bricks of troops, multiples, and Falcons in order to deal a hefty amount of damage early on in an attempt to kind of cage our opponents in their deployment zone or on their section of the board for a first couple turns to build a lead. From there, after everything's been wiped out, which it inevitably will, we revert to our more traditional game plan of just contesting and running away to ride out the game. So something I really enjoy about a list like this is it has the ability to 1v1 difficult targets. Instead of us having to pre-measure and perfectly position all of our units to maximize, our firepower onto something, we could just send out a single unit to deal with a target, then maximize our stratagems and agile tokens to try to keep them safe. Our enhancements come into play here as well, whether it's the Mistweave Cloak, getting a big 12-man unit of Harlequin troops to infiltrate into the mid-board, or using Chegarak's Coil to deal a hefty amount of devastating wounds, especially in combination with grenades. This can do a shocking amount of damage into any target. When you combine this with something like our Falcons, this really lets all of our units start to punch up. We're re-rolling fusion pistols and all of our devastating wounds as well with our troops out of the Falcons, and then just dealing a hefty amount of attacks with dev wounds with everything else. What this does is lead to a much simpler game and allows us to run away potentially with a much higher score. Sometimes it's really nice to be able to end a game on turn 3 if your opponent didn't deploy well, and catch a break in between rounds. So something I really enjoy about a list like this is how flexible it is. We can position ourselves to either move block or alpha our opponents with that Shadow Seer and the Mistweave Cloak. Because we have access to that 6-inch reactive move, that means we can get most of our troops to relative safety if we really needed to. Now in this game, we didn't get them in enough of a great spot to be able to get entirely behind this rune over here, but a lot of them are going to be able to move block afterwards. You can use this in conjunction with with fade back if your opponent decides they're going to shoot them as well, and keep them relatively protected. Now, if we win the turn 1 dice roll, we can send this entire unit forward to collapse into our opponent's lines, then move everything else up to stage in a position to finish the attack or the game essentially on turn 2. You have a lot of adaptability with a unit like this. Now, overall, if you are going for that strategy, just know that we are still pretty fragile. While the Harlequin troops can get -1 to hit in combat, they're still going to fall through weight of attacks. If we decide that we are going to alpha strike our opponent and we flub the attack, we don't kill as much as we think we're going to, and they're able to wipe that unit out in the same turn, it spells doom for us afterwards. We really want to make sure that we are planning and preparing appropriately. A lot of times you're going to want to put this unit and the solitaire out together in order to guarantee you tie up what you need to. Alternatively, if your opponent has something like fallback, shoot, and charge, like Gladius, Space Marines, where they can do it with their whole army, or Emperor's Children, this is a losing proposition. I would not recommend it unless your opponent gives you like the perfect opportunity. If they don't have something in a middle rune, you can throw up your fire dragons and your shadow seer brick and your solitaire. Then maybe it's worthwhile. Something also that I would state is really great to have in a list like this is a wave serpent. The wave serpent is great in order to reactive move back into if you were planning on staging or pushing forward with a big brick like the shadow seers. Just allows a little bit extra protection in the clapback. But overall, if you make the attack and it works, you're going to do very well. If you don't, it is going to be an uphill battle for the remainder of the game. Now, I think most of the solid matchups stay the same, with the exception of a few. I think we have a much better matchup into something like Chaos Space Marines, World Eaters, Custodes, Death Guard than we did before, but we are going to lose a little bit into the more MSU style armies. I do believe that shifting away an additional 5 or 6 units from the MSU approach puts us in a rough spot for Eldari, especially with their big fights first bricks and everything else. It's a little harder to tackle it, and again, warp spiders, swooping hawks, reapers will start to do very good work, especially into our big bricks. What we really want to do is avoid those bricks getting into anything substantial early on, because they will get wiped pretty quick just by weight of firepower. Now, the rough matchups I would still consider would be something like Imperial Knights, and I think this does give an even bigger edge to Astra Militarum, because those Khazarkin and just weight of fire are going to be able to bring down our big bricks that much more efficiently. We don't have as much protection for our troops at this point in the game, and unless we can tag absolutely everything early on, it may be a struggle. So I think a good example of a more aggressive style list would be what I've been running here recently. We have 3 Troop Masters, one with Chegarak's Coil attached to an 11-man unit of troops. The other 2 Troop Masters are inside of Falcons. We have a Shadow Seer with the Mistweave to infiltrate that midboard or outer objective with a 12-man unit of troops. We have a Solitaire, 4 units of 5 troops overall. 2 of them are in Star Weavers, 2 of them with the Troop Masters in the Falcons, and then 2 units of Fire Dragons and a Wave Serpent. You can do a ton with this list. If it doesn't make sense to infiltrate the Shadow Seer with the Mistweave into the midboard, that's fine. It's a great target to go into Strategic Reserve or pull off the board with Exit the Stage. You can put your 11-man unit of troop with the Troop Master inside of the Wave Serpent if you don't need the Fire Dragons in your opponent's lines early on, or we could just force action on the outer objectives with our Star Weavers and Falcons until our opponent decides to commit. Then we can collapse the midboard with our other 33 troops plus Troop Masters and Shadow Seer afterwards. This just allows us to do a ton, but there's only 15 total units. Some considerations I would make for a list like this is definitely Eldrad, possibly Warlock Conclaves. Eldrad being able to generate that extra CP is huge, but also being able to put +1 to wound on a target from anything in our army allows us to punch up even that much more efficiently afterwards. If we put +1 to wound on a target, that means we can re-roll ones to hit with our big Harlequin bricks, and the lethality just goes up exponentially. Shroud Runners are still a really great fit if you're trying to move block your opponent. Swooping Hawks are pretty solid. Warp Spiders still pretty good, and Storm Guardians for your home field objective and to push out later on. What we really want to do with a list like this is have the option or the threat of jailing your opponent in their deployment zone. It'll make them deploy a little bit more cagey, which gives us an extra turn essentially to score, or it gives them a chance to make a mistake and we still get that alpha strike if we really needed. In this final style list is essentially just Eldari utilizing the Ghosts of the Webway detachment and some Harlequins to take advantage of the stratagems. This can be whatever you want it to be. If you're not tied to a specific Harlequin theme, like I am, I always want to get as many Harlequin troops and units as I can on the board. The Eldari Codex can fill almost any role you might need in your list. A traditional Eldari army has a unit for anything, specialists to complete individual roles very, very well, whereas Harlequins tend to utilize one type of unit, our troop, to do everything, but it's just kind of done okay. The Ghost of the Webway detachment allows for a lot of skill expression, and for that reason, I don't believe there will ever be just one winning style of list. Whatever you're comfortable with, whatever your action plan is, you can make it work utilizing the entirety of the codex. Now, I think there are a ton of reasons to play a more traditional Eldari style army utilizing the Ghosts of the Webway detachment with some Harlequin troops. One, it gives you access to a lot of fast OC. You do not have to rely on just damage to take over objectives or deny points on your opponent's side of the board. You get some free kills by utilizing the Starweaver's Reembark and an abundance of reactive style moves as well. In the early game, it's always nice to be able to pick up a trash unit without trading something of your own in return. This changes the dynamic of a lot of the games. Also, having access to Bloody Dance with Troop Masters or the Solitaire gets you a few more free kills on the back end. Having access to those lone ops, though, is something that Eldari traditionally doesn't have up until this point. I know the Solitaire is available, but the Solitaire with a Resurrect strat is so much more impactful than without. And then this also gives you the ability to punch up or tag team a couple of your opponent's maybe more difficult units by use of Dev Wounds. So a lot of strengths on the Eldari side of things. Now, while all of that sounds great, it does come at a cost. It requires a ton of situational awareness and understanding of what each and every one of your units is capable of. The troops tend to be a good bit less efficient than an aspect unit at fulfilling its given role. For example, the troops can take down a tank with grenades, infusion pistols, and devastating wounds, but they're not going to do so as well or as consistent as a unit of fire dragons. Beyond that, they may not be able to take down medium to heavy infantry as well as a unit of banshees with something like an autarch. So the troops tend to be a good bit less efficient, but they bring a little bit more utility overall. Understanding the difference between the two is what's going to lead you to a little bit more success. But one of the biggest reasons you don't see this that often is there is no strat support for any non-Harlequin unit in this detachment. So something I really do enjoy about this idea of list is that you can essentially cater it to be pretty solid into whatever you want. It just depends on what your local meta looks like, if you read the room the right way. Overall, I always feel like we have a bad matchup into Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, specifically the Armiger and War Dog span, but who knows what you might come up with. So I wanted to highlight a couple lists that have been played recently in Teams environments utilizing the Ghosts of the Webway detachment at the highest level. Liam VSL absolutely crushed at Home Nations utilizing the Ghosts of the Webway. He brought Eldrad and a Farseer, both attached to 4-man units of Warlocks. This is a ton of Torrent firepower coming in at strength 7. He can also get +1 to wound with Eldrad, and he has the singing spears. This can do a deceptive amount of damage. He's also bringing a Solitaire who gets access to that Resurrect strat. 3 Troop Masters attached to 3 troop inside of 3 Star Weavers, most likely to engage on the objective, steal some objectives, and free kills early on through the disembark and re-embark from the Star Weavers. He's bringing a big unit of Harlequin troops with a Shadow Seer. He's not utilizing them to infiltrate, more so to get that 18-inch lone op and potentially remove them from the board with Exit the Stage and take over different sections of the board as needed. He's bringing a few utility pieces like the Storm Guardians to steal objectives later on in the game or protect his home field. 2 units of Warlock Skyrunners and a unit of Rangers. Now, one of the things I found most interesting in this list is the 3 units of Dark Reapers. While traditionally I would have filled this with something like Fire Dragons, I think in conjunction with Eldrad, the Dark Reapers add something a little bit different. I really, really like it. Because of that +1 to wound, these Dark Reapers can start punching up and also keep themselves safely out of line of sight from a lot of our opponent's different units. In the early turns, maybe they're doing actions or they're just getting some additional firepower through use of the Tempest Launcher and that indirect fire as well. So I really like the addition of the Dark Reapers. Now, another list I really loved was from Victor Schmidt in the Pyra Cup. This was done at the highest level of play. This is a much more heavy-handed style of army. He has a Troop Master with Checker X Coil and a Shadow Seer with Mistweave, both attached to 2 11-man units of troops. He has 3 units of 5 troop inside of 3 Star Weaver, but then he's bringing Osserman and 5 Dire Avengers inside of a Falcon beyond this. So they can put out a good amount of devastating wounds in the shooting phase, and they're also getting some rerolls from that Falcon as well. He has Storm Guardians, mainly for the home field objective, maybe push the midboard later on. And then the craziest thing I had seen in any of these lists was 3 units of 10 Swooping Hawks. The mortal wound output of this army is pretty astonishing. I believe he can put upwards of maybe 30 to 40 devastating wounds or mortal wounds onto their opponent's army right in the midboard or whatever section of the board you needed to, and everything else has a pretty good amount of mobility. But it seems like you can either screen wherever you need to screen, or you can just collapse on your opponent's entire force if they get too close. So again, this is very heavy-handed, but also lends itself to a ton of creativity. I do not understand exactly how to play an army like this. I don't even want to pretend to. This is one of those combinations of Eldari with Harlequins and the Ghosts of the Webway detachment that someone came up with on their own, and I believe will have the absolute best game plan. I don't know if anyone else is going to be able to pick up something like this and do that well, but I love to see it. I think these 2 armies perfectly encapsulate what you can do inside of the Ghosts of the Webway detachment when you have some reps, some practice, and an understanding of what you want to accomplish on the board. These lists are out of this world. I love them, and congratulations to both of these guys for getting it done. Which leads me to where I think we stand in the meta. And to be honest, this is a difficult question to answer. I think at some of the highest levels of play, I think if you understand the ins and outs of your army and your matchups, Harlequins and the Ghosts of the Webway detachment could be very well positioned into a ton of matchups. I wouldn't be surprised to see an army like this or something like Liam VSL had brought into teams a lot more regularly. But if you are new to the game or you're dabbling in the army itself, this is very difficult to grab some wins. It took dozens of games until I really started to grasp the concepts. It's a different style of Warhammer that's not as streamlined as your traditional 40K faction. So I do believe that it could be well positioned, but it's going to require that extra effort on us to make it happen. But overall, I really hope you enjoyed. Thank you again. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.